won't believe how bad it's gotten in Canada. The cost of living isn't just high, it's breaking people's ability to save. Inflation is eating away at paychecks faster than ever, and the result is brutal. 85% of Canadians now say they're living paycheck to paycheck, and 78% expect to save even less for retirement in 2025 than they did last year. For a lot of Canadians, the dream of retirement is starting to feel like it's slipping away, maybe even out of reach altogether. And if you've got little to no savings, you've probably asked yourself at some point, can I retire on $1,500 a month? Can I retire on just CPP and OAS? In today's economy, for a lot of Canadians, that might sound impossible. But what if it isn't? What if there might be a way to make it work? A real, comfortable retirement on an amount that most Canadians would consider far too little to survive on. I'm Joe Macek, cross-border investment advisor and portfolio manager with IA Private Wealth and IA Private Wealth USA. And in today's video, I'm going to show you what CPP and OAS you can expect and what it will actually pay you after tax. If it's truly possible to retire on just $1,500 a month in Canada or abroad, the cheapest countries where you could live comfortably on that budget, and the truth about Canada's departure tax, when it hits and when you're exempt. Let's jump in. When I was researching topics for upcoming videos, I thought it would be both fun and honestly a bit of a challenge to make a video on how to retire on just CPP and OAS, or retire on just $1,500 a month. Now, most of the people who reach out to me do have at least a modest amount of savings. In fact, it's actually rare that I speak with someone who hasn't put at least a little something away in an RSP or a TFSA. And so this video will be the first in what I think will be a pretty cool series on this channel, where I'll explore how to retire on various lump sum amounts like $500,000, $1 million, or more. And I'll be using some of the best financial planning software tools in the industry. These videos should give you an idea as to how long your personal lump sum will last, how much you can spend according to your lifestyle, and showcase an optimal amount that you can withdraw from your various savings amounts. I also thought it would be cool to start this series at a very low baseline. No savings, no home to sell, just Canadian government pension plans like CPP and OAS. And my thought was we would work our way up to those higher amounts of $500,000 and $1 million. So with all of that said, I want to take a moment to clarify some of the very important assumptions we will need to make while thinking about this challenge. And without sugarcoating it, the assumptions are going to be pretty big for obvious reasons. First, we are going to assume that you are 65 years old. You're planning to retire at age 65 and not have any work or side gigs bringing in any extra income. Now, many of you, of course, will have side hustles, so this could be a bonus to your retirement. But for this video, we're going to assume that you're not making any additional money. Second, we're going to assume that you've saved absolutely nothing for retirement and have absolutely no assets whatsoever. Third, we will also assume that you've worked and contributed long enough to qualify for at least the average CPP payment, which for most Canadians is not a stretch. Fourth, we will assume that you've lived in Canada as a resident for a full 40 years after turning 18, qualifying you for the maximum OAS payment. Again, not a stretch. Fifth, we will make the assumption that you are not eligible for the guaranteed income supplement, even though with this tiny amount of income, you probably would be, but for the purposes of this video, we will exclude GIS. And sixth, and this is a big one, we're going to assume that if you are thinking about retiring abroad to another country outside of Canada, you have already secured a way of retiring abroad to that country, meaning you have at least a temporary residence visa in the country where you're planning to retire to, or you have some sort of citizenship or some other way to permanently reside in one of the countries we're going to talk about later in the video. Now, I know what you are thinking. This assumption might be a bit of a stretch, and yeah, I think you could be right if you called me out on it, as some of the countries we discuss have income and savings requirements that exceed the $1,500 Canadian that you're going to get from CPP and OAS alone. But again, for the purposes of this video, I wanted to not only focus on the cost of living aspect, but I really wanted to try to think outside the box when it came to thinking about your retirement solutions. You see, a lot of retirement planners in Canada build their entire approach around one assumption, that you're going to retire here in Canada, and that the only thing that matters is how much money you've saved. They'll run the numbers, circle a magic figure, and then tell you whether you can or you can't retire based on that single target. And if you don't hit it, the advice is almost always the same. You got to keep working longer, you got to cut back back on your lifestyle, or both. And I know this because, to be honest, early in my career, I was guilty of the exact same thing. I'd sit down with a prospective client, look at their numbers, and immediately assume that their retirement would be here in Canada, and then I'd give them a verdict. Yes, you can retire, or no, you can't. All based on a single target number from a strictly Canadian perspective. But since becoming a creator on YouTube, my perspective has completely shifted. It's opened my eyes to retirement solutions that many traditional advisors never even put on the table. Options that extend beyond Canada's borders into jurisdictions where the cost of living is a lot lower and a comfortable retirement can be far more attainable. As a result, I've completely changed my approach. It's no longer about a simple yes or no verdict on retirement. It's about taking the amount of money that you already have saved and really seeing if we can create a path that lets you retire in comfort on your own terms without being forced to work another 5 years if you don't want to. That path might mean looking beyond Canada's borders where opportunities can change the math entirely. Retirement planning isn't about chasing some arbitrary magic number, yet YouTube is flooded with videos telling you how much you need to retire and throwing out million-dollar numbers as if everyone's journey looks the same. So while that last assumption might be a bit of a leap, we're going to move forward assuming that you've already secured a visa, have citizenship, or found some other way to make residency possible. And yes, I realize that in most countries, you will need to show some level of minimum income and, in some cases, a minimum savings balance to qualify. But for the sake of this video, again, we will assume that you've cleared that hurdle. I'm also going to touch on some of the basic cross-border tax considerations that will come up when you're thinking about retiring or moving abroad. But let me be clear, I'm not a cross-border accountant. My role is as a cross-border investment advisor. In the US, I'm an investment advisor representative registered in Texas working with American clients. In Canada, I serve as a portfolio manager for Canadian clients and those navigating life on both sides of the border. This is where I specialize, helping cross-border clients manage their investments, plan their retirement projections, and deal with the unique complexities that come with holding assets and retiring across two different countries. I've had a few consultations in the past where people I met with through YouTube thought I had an accounting background, did tax filings, or gave detailed tax advice, but that's simply not what I do. I can comment on tax minimization strategies, but my role chiefly is to help you manage your investments. That said, I work closely with a network of excellent cross-border CPAs and tax specialists in both Canada and the US, and any tax information that I share here should always be confirmed with a tax professional. And if you need more in-depth support, I'd be happy to connect you with one. Just reach out to my office and we can arrange a consultation. Okay, so with all that out of the way, we have our assumptions, we have our disclaimers. Our next step in this process is to establish exactly what we can realistically expect from CPP and OAS when we retire. Let's start by answering two key questions. What is the average CPP monthly payment and what is the maximum OAS monthly payment? Well, according to the CRA website in January 2025, the maximum monthly amount that you could receive if you start your CPP pension at age 65 is $1,433. However, most Canadians do not get the maximum amount. A lot of Canadians get around the average CPP amount, and this average amount paid monthly to a new retiree starting at age 65 is just $899.67, or just shy of around $900. It's important to note that CPP is highly dependent on how much you have contributed to it while you were working. It's employment-based, so the more you've worked and the more you've contributed over your working years, the higher your monthly benefit will be. The OAS pension maximum monthly payment amount as of this writing is as follows. If you are between the ages of 65 to 74, the maximum that you could receive is $727.67 per month. If you are 75 or older, the maximum payment increases to $800.44 per month. In order for you to receive the maximum OAS benefit, you must have been a resident of Canada for at least 40 years after turning 18. What a lot of people misunderstand about OAS is they think that it depends on work history. It doesn't. OAS is not dependent on work history. It is not employment-based. It's residency-based. If you have lived in Canada and simply existed in Canada for 40 years just breathing oxygen, after 18 years old, you will qualify for full OAS benefits regardless if you have ever been employed. Unless, of course, you make too much money in retirement and then it gets clawed back. But that's a whole other video. If you've lived in Canada for less than 40 years, your OAS payment will be prorated based on the number of years you've lived here. For example, if you've lived in Canada for 30 out of the 40-year requirement, you'd receive 30 out of the 40 years needed, or 75% of the maximum OAS payment. And so, as I discussed earlier, we will follow our assumptions and we will use the average Canadian CPP payment at 65 of $899.67 and the full OAS payment at 65 of $727.67, which comes out to a gross number before taxes of $1,627.34 per month. But that is the gross amount. How much is the amount after tax? Well, I would never want you to think that I'm pulling income numbers out of thin air. So let's head over to my website, joemacek.com, and plug the actual amount of gross annual income into the income tax calculator that I have available for you free to use. And while you're there, feel free to check out any of the other calculators as well. There's a lot of little cool gadgets and tools on there to help you if you're serious about planning for your retirement. Speaking of numbers, did you know that over 90% of my watch time comes from awesome viewers like yourself who haven't yet subscribed? If you happen to like my content, please take a quick moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps boost my channel to get in front of even more incredible people just like you. Thanks again in advance for your support. Okay, so now we're going to plug in the combined annual CPP and OAS amount of $1,627.34 per month, which works out to roughly $19,528 per year. Using Manitoba as our province of residence, the calculator shows that this income would result in approximately $861 in total tax payable for the year, bringing your actual monthly income down to about $1,559.53. So it turns out that $1,500 a month was actually a bit conservative, and it isn't just an arbitrary guess. It's a realistic after-tax estimate based on the average government pension income taxed in Manitoba. Now that we've nailed down the after-tax in-pocket amount from CPP and OAS, the real question is this: can I retire on $1,500 a month? Well, to answer that, as I discussed before, I think we have to think outside the usual retirement box, because the traditional Canadian retirement playbook you might get from other Canadian advisors simply won't work here. Do you try to stretch the $1,500 you will get in Canada's skyrocketing cost of living, or do you look to retire abroad, where that same money could buy you a far better lifestyle? And after doing some quick digging on Google, ChatGPT, and Grok, I can tell you this, and no one watching this should be surprised in the least, but if you're trying to retire in Canada on just $1,500 a month after tax, your options are, well, let's just say exceptionally limited. This is not to say that your odds are zero, but I would say they are near zero. Based on suggestions from these sources, cities like Moncton, Quebec City, Saskatoon, St. John, and Thunder Bay offer some of the lowest costs of living in Canada, with rent for a one-bedroom ranging from $700 to $1,300. However, to make it work, you would need to live very modestly, very likely having to share accommodations with a roommate and sticking to an extremely tight budget. And while these cities might technically work, the reality is that with the cost of living on the rise, even when considering that the government pensions are indexed to inflation, they probably will not keep pace with some of the costs of your essentials like groceries and heating bills. That's why we're going to explore what I feel might be a better option: retiring abroad, where your money could stretch a lot further and your lifestyle would likely improve significantly. But is that even possible? Can a Canadian citizen retire in another country? Can you live outside of Canada and still collect CPP and OAS? Well, the short answer to both questions is yes. You've got the freedom to retire anywhere you want as long as you meet the visa and immigration requirements of your dream destination. And yes, you can keep collecting both your CPP and your OAS even while living abroad. In fact, in a lot of cases, the Canadian government will not only send your payments to the bank account of your choosing in another country, they will also convert those Canadian dollars into your new country's currency, often at better rates than you could get. So what are the pros and cons of retiring outside of Canada? Well, let's start with some of the pros. And the first one is very obvious, and it's why we're doing this video in the first place. Pro number one, the lower cost of living. We just talked about how difficult it would be to try to stretch your $1,500 a month to cover rent, groceries, and all of the little expenses that drain your bank account here in Canada, when in many countries that same amount could give you a far better lifestyle, one that that you can only dream of in Canada. You could live in a fairly spacious apartment near the beach, enjoy seemingly luxurious meals for a fraction of the cost, lower grocery costs, and still have money left over. Pro number 2, better weather. This is another major reason why Canadians flee Canada. They're just tired of the long and cold winters. No more digging your car out from under a foot of snow or braving soul-crushing wind chill. If anyone knows anything about harsh winters, believe me when I tell you, living in Winnipeg in January is no joke. Moving to a place with hot sunshine, warm breezes, and palm trees is extremely appealing to a Canadian, especially this one. I know when I'm down south for any length of time in the winter, it boosts my mood and I just feel happier and healthier mentally and physically. Year-round sunshine can completely change the way you feel about your day-to-day life, and this is another huge pro when it comes to retiring abroad. Pro number 3, lower taxes. One of the potential pros of retiring abroad is the opportunity for lower taxes. Depending on where you move, you may be able to reduce your overall tax burden through lower income tax rates, no capital gains taxes on foreign income, or tax treaties that help avoid double taxation between Canada and your new country of residence. Some countries even offer specific retiree visa programs with favorable tax treatment. While it's important to get proper tax advice on your specific situation, lower taxes can mean more of your CPP and OAS investment income stays in your pocket, helping you stretch your retirement dollars further. So now that we've listed some of the pros, what are some of the cons of retiring abroad? Well, I think the first one is fairly obvious and it's probably at the top of everyone's mind. Con number 1, healthcare access. Once you leave Canada, after about 6 months, you'll lose your provincial healthcare. You're no longer covered by the safety net that you've relied on for years. Sure, private health insurance is an option, but it can be expensive and it can vary drastically depending on where you choose to live. In some places, it's excellent, but in others, you might find yourself wishing that you'd stayed closer to home. Con number 2 is distance from family and friends. Leaving Canada also means leaving your family and friends behind. You're going to miss birthdays, anniversaries, and the everyday moments that make family life so special. And as much as I personally hate snow, I think I would miss a white Christmas around the holidays. Being so far from your kids, grandkids, or close friends can feel like you are disconnected even more than you realize. And the cost of flying home, that's a whole nother hurdle you're going to have to consider when you move abroad. Long distances can make the toughest parts of retirement feel even harder. Con number 3, you could lose your advisory relationship. As we discussed earlier in the video, many advisors based in Canada or the US simply aren't equipped or licensed to work with clients once they move abroad or become non-residents. That means if you retire overseas, your advisor may be forced to terminate the relationship with you, leaving you without any guidance on your investments just as your financial life becomes more complex. It's really critical to understand these limitations before making a move, especially if you've built a long-standing, great relationship with someone who knows your financial situation well. And now that we've talked about some of the positives and negatives on retiring abroad, let's assume that you've already weighed everything out and you've made up your mind. You are retiring out of Canada, and you've probably already picked out that perfect sunny destination. But for those still wondering where some of the best places to retire abroad are, I turned to Google, Grok, and ChatGPT and asked, where in the world can you actually retire on just your CPP and OAS? The answers? Countries like Mexico, Portugal, and Spain all offer a pretty good lifestyle for a lot less than you would spend in Canada. Suddenly, retiring on $1,500 a month doesn't sound so crazy after all. In Mexico, living on a budget with Canadian dollars can be quite manageable, and Mexico offers a blend of cultural experiences, beautiful scenery, great weather, and a lower cost of living than many Western countries. Rent for a one-bedroom apartment in cities like Guadalajara or Merida can range from just 400 to 800 Canadian per month. In smaller towns or less touristy spots, you might find rents as low as $250 Canadian per month. When it comes to food, a monthly grocery bill for basics like rice, beans, fresh vegetables, tortillas, chicken, and dairy products would typically cost between $200 to $350 Canadian. Dining out is also really affordable, with meals at local restaurants averaging around $4 to $10 Canadian. For those who prefer to cook at home, fresh produce and meat are significantly cheaper than in Canada, stretching your budget even further. This low lower cost of living and its proximity to Canada makes Mexico a very strong contender for retirees looking to live comfortably on a modest income. Portugal is another popular destination for retirees looking to stretch their dollars further. With its mild climate, affordable living, and welcoming atmosphere, it's easy to see why so many Canadians are drawn here. The cost of living is notably lower compared with Canada, with rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Lisbon typically ranging from about $800 to $1,400 Canadian dollars per month, and even less in some smaller cities or rural areas. Groceries are also really affordable, with monthly costs for food typically ranging between $250 and $350 Canadian, depending on your shopping habits. Utilities and internet will also set you back about $100 to $150 Canadian per month. Healthcare is of a high standard, but you would need to either pay for private insurance or qualify for the Portuguese public system if you're a resident. Some cons to keep in mind are the distance from family and potential language barrier in more rural areas. Still, Portugal offers a relaxed, affordable lifestyle with plenty of charm. Spain is another attractive option for Canadian retirees looking to live abroad. With its affordable cost of living, great weather, and rich culture, Spain offers a high quality of life for those on a budget. Rent for a one-bedroom apartment in cities like Madrid or Barcelona range from $900 to $1,500 Canadian per month. Those smaller towns and rural areas offer even cheaper options. Food costs are also reasonable, as groceries typically cost between $250 and $350 Canadian per month. Utilities and internet are the same as Portugal, and they will usually cost about $100 to $150 a month Canadian. Healthcare in Spain is of excellent quality, and residents can access the public healthcare system at a relatively low cost, although private insurance is also available. On the downside, distance from family again can be challenging, and while many people in Spain speak English, language barriers can still arise, particularly in smaller towns. Still, Spain offers an inviting, affordable lifestyle with beautiful landscapes and a laid-back atmosphere. Okay, so let's say that you've picked your country to retire in, and for our final segment, we will examine what a move from Canada actually starts to look like. And when we do our consultations, the number one thing that people reaching out to me ask about is the exit or departure tax that Canada charges you when you leave. And what are the mechanics behind selling your principal residence and using those proceeds to possibly fund your retirement abroad? How does that work? Well, the quick answer is when you leave Canada and you become a non-resident, the Canadian government will tax you on the value of some of your assets as if you have sold those assets even though you haven't sold them. This is called a deemed disposition, and it can trigger capital gains taxes on things like non-registered investments, vacation properties, jewelry you own, or shares in a business. What is a deemed disposition? Well, it means that the CRA deems that your assets are disposed of even though you haven't actually disposed of them. For example, if you have a stock in a non-registered account that you bought at $5 and it's now worth $10, when you leave Canada, the CRA deems that you have sold that stock at $10 even though you actually haven't physically sold the stock yet, and the CRA will collect capital gains taxes on the now realized gain of the stock. Now, there are some exceptions to the exit tax. Your principal residence, assuming that you sell before you leave the country, and registered accounts like RSPs and TFSAs are not included in the departure tax. Personal use property valued at under $10,000 is also exempt. For example, your home furnishings, personal clothing, or everyday items are not subject to the departure tax. But when it comes to registered accounts like RSPs, TFSAs, it's important to note that once you leave the country, your registered accounts will have non-resident rules attached to them that you will have to be aware of and you'll have to follow once you're abroad. For example, contributions are not allowed anymore once you become a non-resident for tax purposes. Another big area where I got a lot of questions around rental properties and corporations. For example, if you decide to keep a rental property in Canada after you leave, you'll be required to withhold and remit a 25% non-resident withholding tax on the gross rental income to the CRA, unless of course you file the proper paperwork, a Form NR5, which is an application by a non-resident of Canada for the reduction in the amount of non-resident tax required to be withheld. Links are provided in the description below. And if you do happen to own a corporation, you may want to get your tax ducks in a row with your corporation